Indiana is fortunate to be home to some of the nation's leading higher education institutions, both public and private. During our 2017 education discussion, we heard from the leaders of 3 independent liberal arts institutions, Butler University, Marian University, and the University of Indianapolis. Today, we welcome back Teresa Lubbers, Indiana Commissioner for Higher Education, as moderator for today's roundtable discussion around higher education. Teresa was appointed in 2009 to serve as Commissioner for Indiana's Commission for Higher Education, the coordinating agency charged with ensuring the state's post-secondary education system is aligned to meet the needs of students and state. Prior to joining the Commission, Lubbers served in the Indiana State Senate for 17 years, leading education and economic development issues as chair of the Senate Education and Career Development Committee. Joining her on our panel today are leaders from 3 Indiana institutions. President of Ivy Tech Community College, the nation's largest statewide community college system, Sue Ellspermann. In July 2016, Sue was named the 9th president of Ivy Tech and brought more than 30 years of experience in higher education, economic, and workforce development and public service to her new role. Prior to joining Ivy Tech, Sue served as Indiana's 50th lieutenant governor. In January 2018, under Ellspermann's leadership, Ivy Tech launched its new 5-year strategic plan with a vision that aligns with Indiana's goal to equip 60% of the workforce with high value post-secondary educations or credentials by the year 2025. Next, we have presidents of Franklin College, a private liberal arts college, Thomas Minar. Named Franklin's College 16th president in 2015, Minar has launched what is anticipated to be college's most comprehensive strategic planning process to date. For nearly 3 decades prior to joining Franklin College, Thomas had held key leadership positions in institutional fundraising, alumni relations, external affairs, and higher education administration. And finally, we have Greg Hess of Wabash College, a private liberal arts men's college. Appointed Wabash's 16th president in 2013, Hess is leading the college through a strategic planning process that will shape its course through its 200th anniversary in 2032. Prior to joining Wabash, Hess served in senior administration positions at Claremont McKenna College. In addition to higher education, he has an extensive resume as an economist, consultant, and author. Please join me in welcoming the esteemed group of educational leaders right here at our stage. Teresa, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Nasser. Thank you for the introduction, and more importantly, thank you for the great leadership you provide to IUPUI. It's very important to our state. As Nasser mentioned, last year we met and talked about higher education, and we really talked about it through the lens of the growing need for higher education, but this unsettling skepticism about its value and how we could, in fact, create greater value in higher education, and we talked to 3 of our leading institutions at that point. It's safe to say that in the subsequent months, that return on investment discussion has not changed and continues to really influence policy decisions, funding decisions, and decisions that consumers make about the decisions they make about where they choose to access higher education. It's safe to say, and I know the 3 panelists would agree with me, that the old saying is true, that the only thing that is not changed is the only constant is change, and that is certainly true in higher education. In that spirit, we're going to dig a little more deeply today and talk about some of the factors that are influencing higher education with 3 outstanding leaders here in Indiana. I think those of you know this about Indiana. We are known as a place that really respects and has great quality higher education institutions. People come to Indiana to go to colleges and universities here, and it provides a great value to the state of Indiana. We're going to talk about that and about the changing landscape and about higher education more broadly, as well as their particular institutions. More specifically, after they've made some introductory comments, we're going to look at some of the key factors that are really driving change. Changing expectations in higher education, student demographics, technology, workforce demands, and new providers in higher education. But to begin with, I'd like to ask each of you to share your thoughts about the biggest challenges and opportunities facing you in your daily roles as presidents, reflecting on your tenure in higher education and what you think has changed the most in the last decade. And Greg, we'll start with you.
Well, thank you very much, Teresa, and thank you so much, everyone, for coming out today to talk about an important element of what makes Indiana great, which is higher education. To my mind, the thing that has struck me as having had the greatest change and the thing I think about and dominates my thinking is just the misinformation about the value of college education and the critical importance of quality. I think about it, just thinking of the larger time frame of my life. When I was a kid, maybe I wasn't so much of a kid 40 years ago, but 40 years ago, people used to negotiate for their car and pay their tuition. And 40 years later, it turns out everything is switched. You want to buy your car, you know the price, you pay it. When it comes to tuition, suddenly wants to negotiate over every element of it. And it's primarily because they question the deep and intrinsic value of what we do. And to my mind, as an academic and somebody who cares so much about academics, it is enormously perplexing. But let's kind of walk through the example a little bit. 40 years ago, people's cars weren't always running great. There were always problems with your car. There were a lot of cars standing on the side of the road. And so people really questioned the value of a car and its quality. And so they'd look at it and say, it's standing on the side of the road, it's broken. You find out very quickly if your car is a lemon. And that really drove that whole conversation, disconnecting this car and its value. And you see that suddenly you're looking at it, you're saying, oh gosh, the quality here is low. I got to start worrying about its intrinsic value. Here's the interesting thing about higher education. Higher education is in that same vortex right now, and a lot of it has to do with misinformation. A lot of colleges are going to tell you that they provide a great, high-quality education, and I'm sorry to say that not all of them do. But the fact of the matter is, if somebody's not giving you a great, high-quality education, you may not find out for 20 or 30 years. And so the difference between a car and education is that you will learn about the value of the quality of your education when you're about my age. I'm about 55, so 40s, 50s, you're going to see, gosh, maybe I didn't get as much from that education as I should have. What does that mean? That means that if you're out there thinking about what's a great college, what's a great place to look for quality in education, you have to look in the long run. You have to see what are their alumni doing. What have their alumni gone on to do? What kind of happiness have they achieved in their lives? What kind of personal fulfillment? What kind of professional fulfillment? And at Wabash College, that's something we focus a lot on. We're a liberal arts-based institution, so we're not trying to train students for their first job. We're trying to train them for the long run. And for example, in Forbes, we're rated number 9 in the country for the happiest, most successful alums. That tells you a lot about the long-run quality and value of higher education. Ultimately, this misinformation conversation is going to stop, much like cars got better, and a lot of it just has to do with more reporting and more information. My hope is that, that people learn about the importance and the value and the return for higher education, and that we go back to a time period where we can go back to negotiating about our car and stop negotiating about higher education.
That gives us a lot to think about, and I'm going to pivot to you, Tom, and say, does any of that ring true for you? What have you learned in your higher education experience, and since you've been at Franklin?
Thank you, Teresa. It would be really easy to say I have nothing to add after Greg's brilliant summary, but I will say my first car was a Fiat, and so I've been learning lessons ever since. But I never made the same quality choice in higher education. Right. That I did in cars. And so, no, I think Greg is right on. And yet, I'd like to bring something else up, which is we have a very interesting jury of public opinion going on about higher education right now, led by a toxic political environment that has made decisions based often on ill information, that higher education is some source of sometimes evil, or certainly does not bring good value. And that's really stunning. It's true that higher education costs have accelerated beyond inflation, and we could spend all afternoon talking about that and taking that apart. But most of the costs of higher education that have increased are costs that have increased in other industries or where we are responding directly to market demands. So we've responded to the demands of families and students about their needs and interests in technology, for example. We're famous for climbing walls in higher education. Now, you're not going to find a climbing wall in higher education in Indiana, I think, not that I know about. But somehow we have this reputation as having built country clubs for students. We're not operating country clubs, but I assure you the only place that has a climbing wall, or the places that have climbing walls, are places where that's been demanded upon. So there's a lot of meeting demand going on in higher education, making sure that we're providing the best product, back to the quality argument, we can to assure the best return. And the return arguments all win. Okay? Again, we could spend the day discussing numbers, but if you have a bachelor's degree, you're going to make between $300,000 a year and $1 million a year more by age 65 if you weren't at a traditional age, by 65 or 70, depending on which research you zero in on and agree with, more than if you did not have the bachelor's degree. Recipients of bachelor's degrees are likelier in the millennial generation, that sort of age cohort, to have career focus. So millennials that have chosen not to go to college, that have listened to the court of public opinion, then are living in parents' basements, right? And don't have career focus. They will not tell you that the work they're doing leads them down a career path. Those who do have the bachelor's degree, regardless of whether they're living in parents' basements, by the way, will tell you that they do have career direction focus. There's a lot of return out of higher education that brings social benefit and economic benefit. I think that's all I'd like to add right now.
Thank you. We talk a lot about the right fit for students, and clearly the populations that both of your schools have, more traditional 18 to 22-year-olds. But Sue, your population, your market demands are different. The number of people who come there and go directly into the world of work, obviously everybody goes into the world of work at some point, but they come there with a very strong desire to align with their workforce. Talk a little bit about the time since you've been at Ivy Tech and the changes that you've seen and the challenges that you're facing.
Very good. Well, and I reflected 10 years ago where I was the University of Southern Indiana. So another public institution, and just the changes we've made as a state over a decade, something called performance funding, which says it's not just good enough to have students there taking classes. They need to complete in something in a reasonable time. And I commend the Commission for Higher Education for your great work to encourage, and that's working. Step forward now into Ivy Tech, that's really what we've seen, and we have been nicely nudged. I know there's a few General Assembly members here. You've nudged us very much to let us know the expectation is to make sure that those who enter Ivy Tech have a career outcome, that we are aligned to the industries in the communities that we serve across the state of Indiana, and we have spent the last 2.5 years doing that with a very important nudge, but doing it very authentically to make sure that Hoosiers who come to us when they complete will have a job on the other end, or they're going to transfer to one of our four-year partners with a promising career on the other end of that. And that's been a real shift to how we do work, how we operate in the communities we are, and it's turning into real difference to our graduates. In our new strategic plan, we measure wages. 1 year out, what wages are our students receiving in that world of work, those who go on, don't go to a 4-year, but go out into the work world. Last year, that number was 35% of our 1 year out. Folks were making more than the median wage in Indiana. This year, that number is 45%. Our goal is at 80%. will have a high wage, high demand job when they leave us. And that intentionality by industry sector in every community, making sure that we're encouraging students into those careers, that they get the either certificate, associate degree, or certification that will have value to them. And that is a big difference. And then you started by saying, yes, our student body looks different. Well, it looks even more part-time than it ever did. We don't have very many of those 18 to 22-year-olds. Average age is 27. 68% are part-time. Of the 32% who are full-time, only 8% are first-time full-time. That means they started somewhere else first, didn't work out so well at a 4-year of whatever they chose, and then they came to us at a later date. So it is different. And we know that of those who file financial aid applications, a quarter of those have a dependent, meaning likely a child or two. So very working adults with dependents. And so we have to change the way we deliver community college to Hoosiers to make sure we do put heavy emphasis on helping Indiana achieve the Lumina goal, because if we don't, Indiana's economy, which is what we're all about here, won't achieve what it needs to achieve.
Thank you. As you can tell by these answers, we have very different experiences, very different expectations on these institutions and the students they serve. I think that's good. I think it's important for us to acknowledge that people have different life journeys, and we need to find a way to meet the students. You know, we have a strategic plan at the Commission is to build a student-centered, mission-driven, workforce-aligned system of higher education. And what's clear to us is that it is student-centered first. We acknowledge the different missions of the institutions and the need to align those with the workforce. And I think you've heard a different take on that from each of our panelists. But let's talk a little bit more about these changing expectations, both as how they apply to you as a leader in your institutions and the expectations on you as leaders, and then also what accountability looks like more generally for your schools and how you prove the value of the institutions that you lead. I'll start with you, Tom.
Well, the expectations of leaders in higher education are that we turn things around quickly, preferably overnight, that enrollments be buoyant, budgets be balanced, and that fundraising be incredibly successful. Greg and I, at least in our sector, I know, spend a lot of time managing expectations of our faculties and staffs on campus, and also of our trustees, our governing boards. And our governing boards are always donors as well, so that there's always donor expectation because of the importance of philanthropy and what we do in private higher education. And really, private higher education as a sector exists historically and present day because of philanthropy. We're very fortunate in that regard. So those are expectations that are constant on us. On the other hand, if we look at the expectations of the sector, I mean, there have been a lot of moving parts in recent years as the economy has changed so quickly since certainly 2007 or 2008. I'm a political scientist, not an economist, so I leave economics to Greg when we're in the room together. But I will say that, again, the rapid changes that we've seen in the political environment have created and vocal mouthpieces on higher education in the political arena have brought changing expectations to higher education too. But the biggest change that we're seeing is the expectations of families, of young people. Families want to talk about jobs. They really want to talk about immediate outcomes of higher education. And sometimes that's rough, because the economic outcomes of higher education are, remember I said over working life to 64 or 65 or 70, and the best employment benefits of employing the graduates of small private liberal arts colleges come mid-career too, according to the research. So 80% of employers would like to have staff who have liberal arts education. They mention it first up as the kind of education that would be beneficial for them. They also say that they need people with certain kinds of working skills in the first 2 years. In other words, they don't really see the benefits of liberal arts education kicking in into year 3. So we're working very hard at Franklin, where we are absolutely a traditional liberal arts college with professional training in education, journalism, and business, but we're working very hard to make sure all of our graduates leave campus with skills that they take into a workforce right away, so they get jobs right away. And we place in the mid to high 90s within six months of graduation. Probably that's true at most of the 30 independent colleges in the state, and somewhere between 90 and 98, I would guess. So that's really important to us. But we do that, for example, through every student graduating with internship experience, every student graduating with research experiences hand in hand with faculty. It's truly an engaged learning experience, even in the traditional liberal arts setting.
So, Gregory, I'd like to go to you and follow up on that
Sure.
a little bit. And he talked about the changing expectations of families. What about the changing expectations of employers in terms of showing what students have actually learned during the time they're in higher education?
Well, in the experiences I have, and I'm fortunate to be able to talk to a lot of CEOs at companies and also talk to a lot of people who do talent management in great companies. And what's so interesting is that they keep saying the same thing, but they mean exactly different things. The CEO is looking long-term. They want liberal arts educated people. They want people who are going to be there, for deep into their careers, the people who can come up with the big ideas they can ultimately hand over the leadership baton to, and really drive the institution's success. The HR people are looking like, oh, well, I'm looking through the keywords here, and it's just not popping because you're a great liberally educated student, but I'm not seeing, C++, whatever the things they're looking for there. And there's a fundamental disconnect. At Wabash College, we emphasize that we are going to train you for the 10 professions you're going to have in your life, not the one narrowly construed one you think you're going to get when you walk out the door. And that's an expectations conversation we have with parents right up front, that we're going to, train you for the long run. And we have lots of data, pay scale, all the other numbers. We're one of the top 50 in the country, even though we're a small liberal arts college, because we think we give those, not only just the great analytical skills to solve long-term problems, but also give them enough what we call skills and experiences. So we have created a platform of innovation that resides on top of a great liberal arts education. It's called Liberal Arts Plus, and we've created opportunities for students to get involved in kind of interdisciplinary activities that align with their futures, that give them great skill sets, but also give them great experiences in working on important projects, some for democracy and public discourse. How do you have big open conversations? Our group has been brought in by the Attorney General of the state, have gone to other universities to help facilitate difficult conversations. We have a Center for Innovation in Business and Entrepreneurship, which creates partners who learn how to work on project management and do projects both for the college, local nonprofits, and for-profit businesses. We think those types of skills and experiences is really what is driving success, but it wouldn't work if they didn't have that great liberal arts education to begin with. And much like Tom, the liberal arts education we have is overseen by the faculty. It creates a lot of diverse paths for thinking about things, but we know we need to plus them up a little bit, and that's what we're trying to do consistently at Wabash College right now. By the way, Wabash College last year, our settlement rate was 100%. That means we have a talent management director, a gentleman named Stephen Jones, who is a class of '87 and worked for IU Health for many years, who makes sure that every student has an internship, gets a place, and that's with 100% knowledge rate. That means we count every little grain of sand at Wabash College.
Thank you. Nasser asked me if we could fill 45 minutes. Clearly, we're going to have trouble getting through these questions, so we're going to keep moving along. And Sue, when you look at the mission of Ivy Tech and the transitions that have happened since 2005, when we really created Ivy Tech as a community college, you have multiple expectations on this system. And consequently, the accountability for what you're doing looks different as well. You could look at everything from transfer rates to job placement. How do you make your case for the value added and the accountability system that should be right for a community college?
Well, I think because we do have both the workforce and the transfer parts, it is a more complex institution, but the beauty of it is the stackability. It's that we can start a student who comes in and gets a welding credential, goes out and makes 50 or 60,000, wants to come back, and finish an associate degree in business or robotics or something, right? And then they have the associate degrees, and then they can transfer onto a 4-year institution to complete a bachelor's degree, eventually a master's degree. We certainly see it in nursing all the time, where you'd start at an RN, get your BSN, get your MSN, get your nurse doctorate, right? So nurse practitioner. So we have the abilities. Now, messaging and helping every student understand what that looks like for them and what's the right path for them, while meeting the demands of all the employers out there. So when I talk about expectations, the expectations we have, and we hold them heavy and dear, are those two employers in Indiana, because we know we are here to serve employers of the state, making sure that the work we do is not based on national trends, but what does Indiana need of us? And so those expectations we measure. We just completed the last metric to the strategic plan that we had not yet had a good measurement for. Is that measured by the community leaders, people like you? There are probably some of you in here who got the instrument to survey how are we doing in meeting the needs of economic development, of our education, quality of education, of how we serve the communities, and making sure we're doing that in every community we serve. One commitment I made when I came as president was it would have economically been better to have fewer locations across the state of Indiana. We now have 19 campuses and 40 locations, because the expectation is to be able to serve, and within 30 minutes, someone from everywhere in Indiana could get to an Ivy Tech, could complete a degree or credential, which I completely agree with you. It is life-changing. It is the most important thing we can do, is that post-secondary credential that our students, our graduates have that go out, and preparing them to continue on for lifelong learning, which we know many of us did and many of us will continue doing the rest of our career. So yes, there are many expectations. The students' expectations have changed as well. They'd like us to be 24/7. And tutor.com we are, that they can get their tutoring all day long for free, where Sunday nights are particularly busy for tutor.com. But how we serve competency-based, some know that we've moved to 8-week courses. Why? Because students do better, particularly our students do better where they can focus on fewer courses at one time, and they can make progress every 8 weeks. We had a lot of students who dropped out at the 10 and 12-week mark because life got in their way. So we're trying to adapt and change the college to be what it needs to be for our students to succeed, to get them the credential they need, whether that be a certificate, or associate degree, and prepare them for additional education later on that they can stack with very esteemed partners as we have represented here.
Well, I think you've zeroed in on where I wanted to go next, was really talking about the students and the changing demographics in higher education, and the reality that we have more older students, more students of color. We have more students who actually are first-generation students, which means that and we need to serve students differently as well. We know if we're going to get to our attainment goal as a state, which that 60% of Hoosiers would have a quality credential beyond high school. We're at about 42% right now, so we're moving in the right direction, but we have a lot of distance to cover. But when you're looking at those changing demographics, knowing that we're going to have to serve a diverse population better, are you seeing that on your campuses now? I'll start with you, Sue, because it seems most obvious with the older students to be there, but I know all of our institutions are seeing changing in the changing demographics as well. But just a couple comments, if you will, about how you serve a increasingly diverse population, older population, first-generation students.
So yes, we are more diverse, but we pretty much reflect Indiana's population, right? We are the community college, so we have about the same percentage of minority students, et cetera, that you would see in any of our communities, which, by the way, is not good enough. We need to overproduce in all of those areas, all about those first-generation students, particularly our Hispanic students. In so many of communities across Indiana, we look very different, and attracting and we just finished a big study on where are we good or not so good at serving our Hispanic students. Well, we have to be able to to communicate with their family as well as the student. So we're not bilingual in most of our campuses. Our student that we're serving doesn't require us to be bilingual, but their parents do, and for us to be able to communicate well with them. So we have to shift who we are inside, our appreciation of diversity, our climate that we set, culture and climate inside, has some more work to do. And I see it as such a great opportunity we have, for community colleges. Full employment is really tough because it is really hard to find students to come back part-time or full-time because there are so many work opportunities out there for them. But it's also the opportunity to bring every student that has not had the advantages of others, to get them in to a credential program, including working in places like with offenders in our criminal justice system, working in each of our communities. Gateway to Work, which will work with FSSA, with our Healthy Indiana Plan recipients. Gateway to Work will say that within 6 months, in the middle of next year, you need to be working part-time or going for further education. If you're on the Healthy Indiana Plan, you by definition aren't making enough money as a family. So how do we help bring these folks in? But to your point, they bring lots of additional challenges. We just started a team of how do we help our single parents complete their credentials, because it's an abysmal rate that many have of completing. But it is childcare, number one. It is all the challenges of being a single parent, if you will, and the responsibilities that are there. One flat tire can take you down and out for the semester. And there's still the mental health, addiction services, all those wraparound services. So we are adapting at Ivy Tech. We can't provide all those services, but we are finding partners that could range from the YMCA to health care centers that work with us, may send, some of us, shout out to IU. We have a number of campuses where their masters in social work come over and do their practicums at Ivy Tech to help support our students. But it is something that we have to do so much more diligently than what in the past what you thought of community college, while keeping it very affordable. So we don't have, you will come back to us and say, please don't raise your rates more than 2%. I know it's coming. I mean, she hasn't said it yet, but I know it's coming in a few months. So how do we do that while we maintain a very affordable community college, meeting all those needs as we try to get 80 or 90% of Hoosiers to come get some kind of post-secondary credential?
I'm going to give either one of you a chance to make a comment if you want. If not, we're going to move on to the next question. I know you're having changing demographics as well.
Mm-hmm.
Any particular comment that either would like to make?
Yeah, I've got one I'd like to make, and it's one that isn't apparent to as many people. But one of the things that, and particularly when you think about Illumina's audacious goal to have 60% of young people to get a post high school credential or certificate or graduate, I said, well, I hope women don't mind getting to 80%, because right now guys aren't budging off 40%. Mm-hmm. The emerging difference between the performance of young men and young women is something that you cannot trace back to historic disadvantage, but it is the problem we'll be dealing with next, everyone, and people have to commit to that. I wouldn't have come to this understanding if I hadn't been at Wabash College, where we focus and we have an institutional commitment to the betterment of young men. But once you start thinking about that problem, certainly as an academic, once you start thinking about the problem that is actually driving the data, you can't ignore it. You can't stop thinking about it. At Wabash College, we commit ourselves to it, and there are lots of things we do that I think can be helpful to others, but it is the unspoken problem that's out there, and it faces all of our institutions. The outcomes for young men starting in high school, college, graduate school, it's going like this, everyone. And to get to 60%, women may have to break through 100 at some point in order to get us up to 60. I've said it to Jamie multiple times. I'm saying it to as many people as I can, because it is an emerging issue that affects our city, our homes, our families, our homes, our cities, our towns, our state, our nation. Period.
Yeah, we're now to the point where about 56 to 57% of the college-going population are women. I mean,
Yeah.
for those of us who spend our time
Yeah.
promoting opportunities for women, we never really wanted to leave men behind.
Yeah.
So we need to do a better job, and I
Right.
spend a lot of time worrying, being concerned about young men in this state and in this
Yeah.
country. Tom, any comment you'd like to make?
We take as our first priority academic excellence and quality to address those long-term issues. But after that, equity and inclusion is the most important thing that we can be focused on in this generation of educators. We have to take that as a principal objective of the work that we do as professionals for the rest of our careers. This is absolutely critical to help our institutions understand how better to meet the needs of changing demographics. But this is also a way that we serve the corporate community and the civic community, is that we are wonderful partners in helping deal with changing workforce issues. So I want to stand up firmly on that. But I would also like to add to something that Sue said about mental health and addiction issues, which are so critical. I think people often have absolutely no idea increasing demands on campuses in dealing with those problems. But we have two other problems. One is generally secondary preparation, which is not meeting the needs of the college classroom, and that's a different conversation. But it's critical. It is absolutely critical. The other is parents. Launch syndrome. Launch your 18-year-olds or your 17-year-olds to be adults, and stop texting them. And stop texting deans. We need your 18 and 19-year-olds to act like adults. And if they do not act like adults at 19, they will not at 23. And you're not going to text their boss when they're 23 or 4 or 5, I hope. Right? You don't want those texts. You're the bosses. So, in all seriousness, we've gone from helicopter parenting to lawnmower parenting, bulldozer parenting, and snowblower parenting. And these are the things we talk about when we're alone. But really, we've got to have young people who are launched and whom we can help you launch them. That's part of the role that we play.
I think the term I've heard now is the curling parent. You know, somebody has launched the stone and somebody's there with the broom trying to make it land.
It's a new one to me.
You
That's
know,
great.
land in the target. You know, drop the broom, everybody. Drop the broom. You've launched them.
That's
Leave them to us.
Well, obviously, I was overly ambitious with 5 areas. We've covered 2 of the 5 so far. So we all know that technology is changing every enterprise in this country and changing higher ed as well, from hybrid models to full online competency-based programs. So we'll save that for another day because there's just so much to talk about there. But I would like to move to a topic which we've hit on already, but in my circles, the word that is most often used is really workforce preparation. And we've talked a lot about this, about the alignment between what you learn and what you do, the alignment between applied and academic, the need for ongoing continuous learning. How are you and why the liberal arts are important in terms of the changing nature of the world of work and why getting someone a first job is important? But when you consider the fact that in some cases we don't even know what the jobs will be called, we don't know everything about the changing needs in a dynamic economy, how are we preparing people for both their first opportunities and the changing nature of the world of work? And anyone can answer that first who would like to.
I'll jump in beginning. That's obviously about 10 or 15 years ago, colleges had to wake up. A lot of management training programs around the country ended. A couple years ago, Goldman Sachs announced they couldn't afford a management training program anymore, which somehow meant that we could start affording a management training program right now. A big shout out to the Lilly Endowment. The IPO Tech Grant made a huge difference in focusing people's attention on making sure that there were skills and experiences out there, internships, driving into Indiana opportunities. And that really got, at Wabash College, our thinking started. We started running programs to get students better prepared for different types of opportunities, independent of their major. The motto of the Career Services Office is majors don't matter, skills and experiences do. So we said, study what you want. I told my kids that too, so I'm living it, not just preaching it to your kids. I preach it to my two daughters. But I told, get the experiences you want, internships, opportunities like that, make just an absolute great difference. And on top of that, we've also, stolen from some other great institutions out there. I encourage you all to steal as much as you can from Wake Forest, who's done a great job at organizing these things. They, I'm unabashed. We have borrowed from them, and I did at my prior institution as well. We've brought in kind of, credentialing groups that, are low cost, that help us think through lean management training, project management, design thinking, coding, an outsourced company called Fullbridge, just to try to experiment with how do we get a combination of talents into our students, so that rather than talk about their difficult comprehensive exam and classics, they can say, I did well in my academic work. In addition to that, I worked on some projects for the college and a local business. Here's what I did, and here's my internship at a great company in Indiana. So those are things we're up to.
So Sue, when you think about people who are coming back to Ivy Tech to either skill up, get a new job, they've been displaced, how do you think about this balance between getting them a job and helping them be launching a career?
Well, so we also commend what you're doing, Wabash, with the work-based learning, the internships, et cetera, and we're building them into all of our highest demand by industry sector jobs, nursing, things like that. I've already had it forever, right? But not in all areas, because it's important, if you've not experienced that, to know if that's in fact a career you want. So that's really important. Give me the second part of your question. I think I forgot that you wanted to look at how are we dealing with career preparation for those students that who've already been out there.
And I think you made some mention about the stackable part of it, which
Sure.
is important.
Well, sure, but what we realized at Ivy Tech as we were doing our strategic plan last year is that we don't do career placement very well. In fact, I say most of our higher ed institutions could do a better job of that, and we're less than that good. We have bigger opportunities, so we've been working with Ascend Indiana, and in fact, I'll be seeing the finished work of the redesign. We've been working collaboratively to figure out how do we bring employers in early and often. How do we ensure every student has a resume their first semester and they're just updating it as time goes on, that they're well yoked with the industries or places they're going to go, that we have our employers in with us on a regular basis. Yes, we have advisory boards on every program we have across the college, but we really need that local touch and the mentoring that comes with those employers, so that even before they leave us, they know this is a career path that they want to explore. So we have more to do there, and you will see that launch over this next year as how we really become world-class in both the career preparation aligned industry, but also the placement of our students into those proper pathways to meet employers' needs and prosperity of our students.
Well, we are seeing that most of our colleges and universities are designing their college and career services offices, so I think that's encouraging. I'm going to pose one last question, then I don't know, Nasser, are they bringing questions to us? If there are any questions, if not, we'll just keep talking. But we did want to talk a little bit about the impact of new providers in the higher education space. It's clear that people are getting credentials in multiple ways, sometimes at lower costs, sometimes at higher costs. And what do you think, what is our role to ensure quality in these with multiple providers, and how do we, what is our ability to help students find the right fit as they're exploring this new range of ways to get higher education? And is that impacting you at all?
I think we have to stand firm on everything we've done to assure quality in these traditional institutions as well. The accreditation processes that we follow and that we lead for our industry are critically important, and we really believe in our accreditation processes. At the same time, we're fighting enormous demands of regulatory and compliance environments that can cost institutions 6, 8, 10% of our revenues in just maintaining compliance. So we have to, I think, be firm and stand for quality. At the same time, you talk about new providers. I think it's important to recognize that that this changing environment that you refer to, Teresa, is leading even the most traditional liberal arts colleges onto new frontiers. So it's not just about the professional development opportunities that we've created or built our new curricula around that Greg was mentioning. It's what some of the things that we're doing at Franklin in health sciences. So we've created our first ever graduate programs to meet a changing environment and to be a different kind of provider in a professional healthcare setting, for example, as well. So.
We also, I think those changes are healthy. They're going to continue. I think everyone knows the world of higher education is going to continue to change. CBE, competency-based education, is a big opportunity. We have our first two programs that have been accredited by HLC approved, but implementing them with the federal financial aid laws and the way to integrate, it's almost impossible to run the two institutions at the same time. So after working very, very hard, taking years, we're working at that. We're good at transfer between. So we work with a WGU and a Purdue Global and those kinds of models that the 2+2s can still link together. But we certainly need to do more to be where our students need us to be. You said student-centered. If our students do better in a competency-based program, which many adults do, we have to be ready to do that. So we're working hard to figure out how do we make that work within our Ivy Tech system, because that's going to be important. But I think in every step of the way, the certifications, the credentials, the micro-credentials that employers want, we have to respond to that. And we're still not as fast as we need to be, but we need to continue to become more and more nimble. And I think I see him over my shoulder, so that's probably a sign.
Well, please join me in a round of applause for our panel. I know these university folks, thank you for those short replies. They had to work hard. I know, it was hard, but you did a great job. Thank you. Today's presentation will be available as a podcast at WFYI. Our next event is on January 24th. Please be sure to join us at that time. Information and tickets for each of these presenters can be found at economicclubofIndiana.com. I hope you have a wonderful holiday season, and I look forward to seeing you in 2019. Happy holidays, everyone.